Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. In the previous podcast, I presented a critique of Ed Bond's book, Social Problems, A Human Rights Perspective. Bonds has also written about the subject of social problems from a human rights perspective in some journal articles. So if you would like to look those up, you might find them if you have access to journal articles. If you are a professor, a student, and whatever. I have those articles, but I'm sorry I can't give them to you. I wish I could, but they're copyright. Regardless, the notion of human rights as a perspective for understanding social problems is good. In and of itself, it is good. Um, Social problems seen as violations of human rights is appropriate. The question is, how do we define human rights? And again, what Eric Bonds does is he defines it based upon the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which is simply a document made up by human beings. That is my problem with it. On the other hand, what I see as more helpful personally, and you are certainly free to disagree with me on anything I say, is Roy Baskar's approach to morality. Roy has said that morality is real, is a real thing. It's not simply a social construction. It's not simply our imagination. It's not something that we fabricate. It's not something that we make up. It is a real substance, a substance. There is a substance of morality that exists in the world, in everything, in the entire universe, including in ourselves. So if we want to understand what is moral, we need to understand who we are and why we are here. And Roy Bhaskar spends a considerable amount of time in his development of the philosophy of critical realism and the supplemental philosophy of meta-reality in attempting to do just that, to describe who we are and why we are here, meaning what is the nature of our lives. And what he says basically is that if morality is a real thing, then we need to understand what that reality is. What Roy argues is that reality is human emancipation. Emancipation from racism, and especially capitalism, but also sexism, ageism, ableism, called by our friends in Britain disableism, ethnicism, and so on. A wide variety of different oppressions, which I have elsewhere referred to as intersectionality or social class. That basically is what the oppression is. Ultimately, it is intersectionality or social class. So in order to establish a world of human rights, we need to eliminate social class. Social class is the enemy, and social class is controlled largely by the first world, meaning that in the first world, we have most of the money, the largest agencies of finance are in the first world. The largest organizations of finance are in the first world. Wall Street, for example. Wall Street is the major area in the world which has financial institutions. And they are really, really powerful, much too powerful. They should not have that much power, but they do. In the world as we now see it, finance is extraordinarily powerful, and it pretty much determines most aspects of our lives. We are in a world of capitalism, the capitalist world system, using the term coined by Immanuel Wallerstein, the sociologist and Marxist from upstate New York, a brilliant man. Now, I don't agree with Wallerstein on everything, but I do agree with him on many things, especially on his way of structuring capitalism. Because, like me, he understands capitalism as a complex. He understands social class as a complex. Basically, capitalism and social class are pretty much the same. You can say that capitalism is the engine, or in critical realist terms, the causal mechanism which sustains capitalism. Without social class, there would be no capitalism. Without, unfortunately, people like me, the wealthy, in my case, the nouveau riche, but also old money, there will be no need for social class in the world today. So sadly, I look at myself in the mirror every day and I see a person who is a part of the problem. Now, does that mean that I am actively engaged in the oppression of workers? Does that mean that I am actually engaged in the oppression of the subaltern? No, just the opposite. I am trying to liberate workers and the subaltern. My life was as a worker, as a college professor. That's been my experience. I have seen from the inside out what it is to be a worker in the capitalist world system and the way in which workers are so dependent upon a system which was created by capitalism. I chose to become a sociologist because sociology has been, maybe less so now than before, but has been the most left-wing field in academia. Arguably, economics is the most right-wing field in academia. And so it should be no surprise that economists and sociologists do not see eye to eye. There is a branch of sociology called economic sociology. Economic sociologists are generally Marxists. On the other hand, most economists are classical economists, meaning they support classical communism. They support the idea of the free market, of an unfettered market. Basically, they support the idea of giving unlimited amounts of wealth to people like me, I guess. Do I like that? No. Am I happy that I am a part of that social class? No. Do I wish I were not a part of that social class? Yes. But I have chosen to remain in that social class. I could simply give all my money away. The question is, who would I give it to? Now, I do give some of my money away, but not all of it. Because literally, I do not trust most people. And I know myself. And I think I can trust myself to deal with my wealth in at least somewhat of a responsible way. So, coming back to the issue of human rights. Human rights is basically an issue of capitalism. Human rights is economic. Human rights is based upon oppression, all different kinds of oppression. But the heart of oppression is social class, again defined as intersectionality, which incorporates all sorts of things like race and gender and disability and age and so on. And so, when I am talking about disabling or tearing apart, that feels good to say, tearing apart capitalism. I think I'll say that more often. What I mean by that is figuring out ways to challenge the capitalist world system, because ultimately it is the capitalist world system which deprives people of human rights. So, what is a critical realist approach to human rights? Well, again, we come down to what is human nature. Roy Bhaskar, in effect, says that human nature is dual. One part of human nature is connected with what he calls demi-reality. We have discussed demi-reality before. Demi-reality, to Roy, is a translation of the Sanskrit word Maya. Maya literally translates as illusion, but Roy intends it even more broadly than that. To Roy, Maya is also disunity, it's also splitting, it's also separation, and so on. Basically, ego, selfishness, self-centeredness, being ego-centered, all of those are expressions of demi-reality. And that is how the world is structured today. And so, the type of human nature that we as human beings mostly draw upon is demi-reality, because demi-reality is one part of human nature. It is not all of it, but it is a big part of it. And unfortunately, either because of ignorance or greed or maybe apathy, most people don't question that. They accept the system. They accept the system, the capitalist world system. They're not willing to step outside the box. And so we live in this ongoing drama of one catastrophe after another. Whether it's people dying because of poor health care, whether it's countries being bombed by imperialist nations, which we're seeing right now, whether it's the world deteriorating step by disgusting step because of the actions of capitalists to maintain that power, to maintain their tax loopholes, and to prevent other people, poorer people, from getting those same tax loopholes that they themselves enjoyed. So all of those things are connected with demi-reality. So to Roy, demi-reality is not something which we have constructed in our minds. It is something which actually exists. It is a part of nature. It is literally a part of nature. It is natural. We'll come back to that more in just a bit. How that is relevant and how that contradicts the definition of nature, which is commonly used by capitalists. But the second type of nature that we as human beings have access to is what Roy Bhaskar refers to as co-presence. Co-presence is a part of non-duality, meaning it is a recognition that although you and I are unique individuals with our own strengths, our own weaknesses, with our own flaws, with our own abilities, and with our own disabilities. In spite of all that, in spite of the differences which are evident, there are obvious differences between human beings. What binds us together is what Roy calls co-presence. That is literally a part of the nature of existence as well, just as demi-reality is. But rather than being based on disunity, demi-reality is based on unity, on non-duality, or in Sanskrit terms, Advaita, which is literally non-dual. But non-duality is generally the translation given to the term Advaita. So there we have it, a very simple and concrete, hopefully, exposition of human nature. That human nature is really two things. It's not one thing, which many capitalists prefer to see it as. It's two things, two separate natures. And each of those natures has its own causal mechanisms. And so if we live based upon a particular nature, then inevitably we will be confined to that nature, and we will live according to the restrictions of that particular nature. So it is best, in my view, that we live in a world of co-presence and not in a world of demi-reality. Now, is that easy? No, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. It is very, very hard. It is challenging. It is something which I personally find very challenging in my own life. But for me, the challenges are different perhaps than for most people. For me, the challenges come from my autism, and which is also a kind of demi-reality, and overcoming that autism in my own life, trying to see the world through a different mirror, which is really hard for autistics because we tend to see the world through the mirror of our own autism. But that's really beside the point. Basically, we have those two types of human nature: demi-reality, the lower nature, and co-presence, the higher nature. Now, why is that a challenge to capitalism, to the capitalist world system, which is so dominant in the first world, and which is the reason why the first world is crumbling at such a rapid pace? The basic idea of capitalism, as it was defined in Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, is that human beings are naturally, so there's that word nature, are naturally greedy. Greed is the natural part of who we are. And so Smith advocated his form of capitalism, which arguably is not as extreme as modern post-industrial capitalism, so-called, but still it's capitalism. It's an economic system based upon greed and based upon the idea that greed is inherent in who we are. Well, yeah. What is Adam Smith talking about? He is talking about demi-reality. So is he wrong? No, he's not wrong. Greed is demi-reality. So that is a part of who we are. That is one of our natures. But Adam Smith leaves out the higher nature. He leaves out co-presence, the co-presence of non-duality, which makes us all literally a part of one another, which we are. So I can think of ourselves as separate, and that is not entirely wrong. I am literally separate from you. I have my own thoughts, my own beliefs, my own ways of looking at the world, which may be very different than yours. My own hobbies, my own interests, my own occupation, now retired from it. So I have my own perspectives and my own particular way of functioning in the world, my own personality, I guess. And so do you. But so what? So what? Ultimately, what matters is not those differences, which are a part of who we are. What matters is the fact that despite those obvious differences, we are all connected to one another. And that is the higher nature, which I think can ultimately teach us about what morality is. If we all live in co-presence, if we all focus upon emancipation from demi-reality by living in co-presence, by becoming emancipated from demi-reality, by living a life free of social class, ultimately, free of racism, free of classism, free of ableism or disableism. All of those different oppressions or dominations which exist all around us. Then we can become truly happy and emancipated human beings. For the time being, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.